having that signature piece, I think, is so cool, especially for venues. Like you want, especially for photos and things like that, you want to be immediately recognized. Someone's taking a photo in front of that. It's like, oh yeah. And like, you know right away that that photo was taken at that location.
Yeah. Always cool to kind of have that surprise wow factor, which is how I kind of describe that. Once you see it, you're like, okay, cool, I see it. But then you walk them, past what we have, the restroom, we have like a little quiet lounge area through the second set of double doors. And then you get into that. And that's kind of that wow factor of like, okay, cool. Like I've seen the venue, but oh, this is completely different. This is like kind of that icing on the cake, right? The cherry on top.
You're listening to the Venue RX podcast.
What's up, everyone? Jonathan here with the Venue RX, and on this channel we are passionate about documenting and sharing best practices around owning, operating, and managing world-class wedding venues. And we have so much fun on this channel talking to wedding venue owners. We talk to industry professionals on topics like marketing, sales, operations. We also do some solo content just based on my personal experience running multiple venues in the Southern California market. And it's been a lot of fun creating this content. If you are a first-time listener or visitor on YouTube, thanks so much for being here. If you are returning, please consider subscribing or maybe even sharing this with someone who you feel like would benefit from it. All right, today we have a really special show because we have someone who is very big in the podcast space, and we'll get into that in a little bit, but he also recently started his very own event venue. And so I'm really excited to welcome to the show Dan with Event 1013. Thanks so much for being here today.
Hey, Jonathan, thanks for having me. Yeah, I was recently a new visitor, a new listener, like you just mentioned myself, and decided to dive into checking out all the shows I can about venue management. So that's how I found you, and super excited to be a guest.
Well, we're excited to have you. Can you tell us a little bit? You are big in the podcast space as well. You have a podcast. We were kind of chuckling before we got on the show that, you're very infrequently a guest maybe, and you're maybe more the host or on that side. Dig into that a little bit for us. What's your background there?
Yeah, and it kind of blends the lines with the event venue and event management and all of that as well. So my background is in 2012, 2013, I started my own podcast. I was a CPA, was podcasting about business and all of that. And one thing led to another, and I ended up deciding to start my own conference, my own events business for podcasters. So that became what's now known as Podcast Movement, which is the world's largest conference for the podcast industry. Been going strong every year, twice a year since 2014. And that's really what I do day in and day out right now is produce our own conferences and kind of mega events. And it's all for podcasters. So that's what I was joking is like, I work with podcasters all day, every day, but I'm very infrequently a guest on podcasts. So it's kind of a weird meta thing for me.
It's so cool. And it is a very weird meta thing. I mean, that's a perfect way to describe it. But I think at the intersection point of where we're talking here today, we're talking about a venue you recently opened, right? Give us a little backstory. How did you go? I heard CPA, I heard podcast, then I heard podcast conference. Now you have a venue. What was the transition like? Can you give us kind of like speed us through that journey of how that came to be?
Yeah, it was a real interesting journey, actually. This venue that we recently purchased just a few months ago, it's a venue that's been going for 13 years. It's local here to where we're at in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, we being my family. And we've attended events at this venue before and found out that it was potentially available to purchase and take over. And we can get into that a little bit further down the show if you want. But when we saw that was available and my wife and I decided, hey, this would be kind of a cool thing for us. She was looking for a career change. I'm always looking for new, interesting things to do. And that kind of intersection with my events industry experience and knowledge and interest just made it something that was, super exciting, what we, considered kind of a challenge to jump into. And yeah, it's cool because I spend most of my time on the other side of the venue business, for lack of a better term. We produce events throughout the year at other people's venues, and I'm always on that side of the table. And now kind of getting that experience of seeing what the other side is like, it's fun. And I think I kind of bring a unique perspective to it because I know what it's like to be the person, the client, for lack of a better term. And now I get to be the venue side.
Yeah, let's jump into the venue side of things. And then I have so many questions professionally and personally. I mean, how you guys do this. And even, I'm curious about the podcast side and the podcast conferences and stuff as well. We'll have links to all that in the show notes, both on the audio side as well as, the YouTube side. So if you guys are listening or watching to this, check that out to make sure that you're able to see what Dan's up to. But Dan, let's talk about the venue. So you said you and your wife together. What is your wife's background?
Yeah, so her background is sales and marketing in the multifamily space. So she spent over a decade in sales and marketing for apartment complexes and things of that nature. So that was something that when we were like, hey, what about running a business? Like it's sales and marketing, right? Like ultimately, those are the two biggest things, is getting those leads and then converting those leads into customers. So between that and then in my experience on the event side of things, we just thought that would be a perfect combination. And so far, yeah, we're having a really good time. That's
incredible. The venue itself. So you're in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, Plano, correct?
Yeah, Plano. And like I said, it's a venue we've been to before. I was actually just kind of cruising Biz Buy Sell, if anyone's familiar with that. It's a place where people can buy and sell businesses. And just my interest in kind of business ownership and entrepreneurship, I every once in a while check out that website and look at what's available, what's, maybe is a neighbor selling something, or, all kinds of weird businesses, pet grooming businesses, or barbecue restaurants, or franchise businesses. And I came across this historic event venue in Plano, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. That sounds like somewhere I've been before. And started digging in and found out, that this venue was for sale and available. And then we went down the path, kind of an interesting path to finding out, and getting to where we are now. It was listed for sale, but it was actually already under contract to another buyer. And so we started pursuing this venue and getting all excited about it. Got my wife's hopes up. I was like, hey, what do you think what would you say you quit your job and we buy this venue and like that becomes your new job? And then I do it on the side. And we got all excited just to find out someone else had it under contract. But things worked out in a way where that fell through and we were kind of the next people up. And went down this crazy path to get to where we are now. And, it seems like it's been a lifetime, but it's really only been about 6 months that all that transpired.
Wow. So I was just going to ask you, how long since you were on Biz Buy Sell, you were kind of made aware of it to when you actually purchased it? Like, what was the timeline there?
Yeah, this was September, October, November, kind of in that time frame of 2022. So, I think that's about 6 months ago or so. But, after we kind of got to that point where we were selected as the new potential buyer for this business after the last one fell through. I think I mentioned to you this before we hit record, but it was an SBA purchase, which we had no experience buying through an SBA loan, which is the Small Business Administration, which is basically means the government is subsidizing this loan for a bank, similar to a lot of mortgages, how those are done. But because it's a government-backed loan, there's all this crazy additional paperwork and documentation and valuation that has to be done by third-party companies. So anyone who's purchased a house, this is like way more detailed and way more thorough than qualifying for a mortgage. It was a crazy experience and a learning experience for us. But that's how we ended up ultimately purchasing the business. And then even now, once it's purchased, there's all these additional like reporting requirements, learning as we go, right? Because we've now, still under 3 months since we've closed that SBA loan and actually closed on the venue. So yeah, we're still kind of working out that acquisition side of things, it feels like, while still, running it as well.
Yeah, I think for anyone listening to this right now, I know we have a lot of venue owners, but we have a lot of folks on here who maybe don't own a venue yet, but would love to one day. And so it's cool hearing about your experience and kind of, some of the opportunities that are available when financing, because that's always, a big question, like how are we going to afford something like that? Were you surprised at all, kind of going down that SBA route? Were you surprised at all at different pieces of the experience, like maybe advice that you would give to anyone who's considering pursuing an SBA loan to fund a deal like this?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest surprise was, like I said, just the amount of scrutiny that the lender, which ultimately they're acting on behalf of the government because it's subsidized, how much scrutiny they put into not just you as the potential buyer that they're lending to, but then also the business itself. So they go through not just your financial background and your, purchasing capability and your capability to pay for this thing, but also like, is this a business that they want to lend on? Which ultimately for us made us feel more comfortable about the purchase, because they went through so much in terms of hiring a valuation company to make sure, yes, this seller that's selling this business, their financials are correct, and they actually have a real business that's making the amount of money that they say it is, and everything checks out. So it almost served as an extra set of eyes when it comes to due diligence on the acquisition part. Like, we did our research, we ran our numbers, but then the bank/government was doing their research and running their numbers and doing interviews with the sellers, just like they were doing interviews with us as the buyers, which to me was like, okay, cool. If we think it's a good business, but also they think it's a good business, then maybe it's a good business, right? Maybe it's something that's worth worth what we're offering to pay for it. So that was interesting. The other interesting thing is how much SBA kind of hooks you as the buyer into this deal. So, if you buy a house, the house is the collateral. And if you stop paying, the bank will take the house back. And then, you walk away with bad credit, but you walk away from the deal altogether. With this, it's not so cut and dry, because you as the buyer could run this business into the ground or, just mess it up, and they still want their money, right? So it's a little different from a house. So the ways they do that is they put a second mortgage, a second lien on your house. So if something happens with our business, they're going to, take our house or take some money out of it. They also make you get life insurance on yourself and your wife, in my case, because we bought it together. So we had to take out additional life insurance policies on ourselves. So if something happens to us and we perish, the government and the bank, they're getting their money back. They're not going to, they're not going to have to worry about what happens to this business. They're getting their money back. So there's a lot of, and that's all like very standard with SBA loans. So the bottom line is they're kind of covering their backsides in case you run this business into the ground or something happens to you and you can't run this business anymore. They're going to get their money one way or the other. So that's a little bit, scary signing. We have a couple rental properties in our names as well. So signing all these liens on all of our properties and everything we own just to make sure the government gets theirs. So that was, I would say, the surprising part of it and kind of the, extra scary part of it.
That's such good advice and perspective, Dan. I mean, I learned so much just now because I didn't know that. And it's like, I think when thinking through financing, we have a couple of deals that we're looking at right now. And as we're looking at different financing options, my wife and I have talked to SBA. Some of those things about the life insurance and some of kind of the standard things, like you don't know unless you go through. So that's invaluable that you shared that. Thank you so much. So you purchased the building. Did you have to do any renovations or anything like that, or was the purchase pretty turnkey?
Yeah. So when we purchased the business, it was, like I said, fully functional. It had been operating, I don't know if I mentioned this, but for the past 13 years, steady track record other than, the COVID bump that every venue saw, but steady track record for events, great reviews online, great reviews on all the, the wedding websites and all of that. So we were kind of able to step right into it and just pick up where the previous owners had left off, which was great. And, certainly we have some ideas for things to change and things that we're starting to implement, but we had the luxury of not, I know a lot of the guests on your shows are building these venues from the ground up, either like literally building the buildings, or they're taking over the buildings and converting them into event venues. And for us, it was probably as close to turnkey as possible. There was a book of booked events already that we were just taking over and managing those sold events. So yeah, really and that was one of the reasons why it was so appealing to us was the previous owners, when they were selling it, they were just selling it because they were ready to kind of move on to the next phase of their life. They weren't selling it because there was some impending doom or something that they had to get out of it or something wrong with the business. So again, just best of situation for us to step into. And that's kind of given us that runway to then take a step back and be like, okay, cool. We don't have to do anything different. We don't have to make any drastic changes. We can really kind of look at what needs to be refined, from a tweaking standpoint, let's call it that, or from a marketing standpoint, what can we do differently, but nothing that just had to be done on day one.
That is Very different experience that I've heard from so many of the guests, right? You're totally right. You come on and it's like we're converting a barn. We got to put in an HVAC system. We're putting in fire sprinklers, fire suppression, right? We're doing all these different things. You're stepping into this and it's already done. I'm curious, we'll get to the marketing, sales, operations, all that kind of stuff in just a second. But last piece of something I'm curious about here. Were you purchasing the building as well, or just the business, the actual event business?
So the way it worked is the previous owners, they purchased the building probably 15 years ago and turned it into an events business. So what we've purchased right now is the business, and they are basically now the landlords of the building, which that's probably a little different from some of the venue owners you do. It's separating the business from the building. So we technically, now that we're basically leasing the building and running the events business out of it, the event venue business out of it. But there's nothing saying we couldn't turn this into a storefront or a restaurant or anything. It's just a matter of, this is the business that's lived in this building for years. And it makes the most financial sense to keep doing that and see if we can do it, better to keep making more money. But yeah, so that's the structure of that. Now, without getting into all the like contract details and all of that, we do have the ability to, at some point, if and when we're ready, to also purchase that building. And that was important to us because obviously if I were listening to this and listening to the scenario, I'd be like, wait, like the building is the business, right? So they're like, there's something weird happening here. Like if it's an event venue, like why do you not own the venue itself, right? That's kind of weird. So it was very important to us in that purchase agreement to also have the ability to, if and when we're ready, to buy the building as well. So that's something we did work out. But as of now, that SBA loan bought the business, and then hopefully in the future, buy the building as well.
Cool. Yeah, I was just thinking about, your wife's involvement in multifamily, your familiarity obviously with just events on a larger scale and doing some of these conferences and things like that. I was curious if you were interested in buying the building itself, not just the business part of it. And the other piece of this for me is, I think venue owners, if they're thinking of selling, might struggle with evaluating the value of the business and the property together because they seem so intertwined. Like you said, it does seem like the venue is the business. So like, how do we separate the book of business, the 40 or 80 events or whatever that we have on calendar, with the actual physical value of the property, the FF&E that's there, furniture, fixtures, all equipment, everything that's there, right? How are those two things evaluated separately? So when you think about it, it sounds like you really did want the option to be able to fully purchase, but right now the easiest chunk to bite off was just the events piece, correct?
That's right. And, we can get into like the characteristics of the building a little bit later if you want, but like it's a historic venue. It's a Texas state landmark. It's in a very desirable part of downtown Plano, which is a suburb just north of Dallas. So it's a very expensive property if one were to go purchase it, a very desirable property if one were to just purchase it. And I think the seller's perspective when they first put this up for sale was they were looking for somebody to kind of take over. I don't want to say take over their legacy, but kind of like this venue has been their life for the past decade plus, and they put their heart and soul into converting it from nothing into this very, well-known, well-respected venue. And in addition to them just looking to sell, to move on to the next phase of their life and to, obviously make as much money as possible on that sale, they also wanted to find good stewards that they trusted to take the business that they built and carry it on to the next phase. So from that standpoint, if I don't know this exactly, but if I were in their shoes, I would be thinking like, hey, the person that might have the money to purchase the whole thing, right, might not be the best fit to purchase the business and do, as we see fit. Because, without getting into numbers, like it's a very large number to buy this building. And that would probably be some sort of like private equity firm or some sort of like out of state investor that's just like looking to, get into the real estate game in downtown Plano, which isn't the same as somebody. Yeah. Which isn't the same as somebody that's going to, carry out their vision. So my thought is, because very early on, they were like, yeah, we want the person that buys this business to eventually buy the building. Like it makes the most sense. Like they saw it, that as a clear path, just like we did. But they, even said to us, like, we felt like, and like you said, biting off, what ultimately is the smaller bite on the front end would be the best pathway to kind of seeing that long-term vision come to fruition. So, they were on the same page as us with that. And, their goal is to ultimately sell us a building, just like our goal is to be the ones who buy it. And yeah, so far so good.
That's so cool. I'm pretty familiar with Dallas Fort Worth. I was actually born and raised in Pembroke, and lived there for 16 years or so before moving here to California. Excited about going back, hopefully soon, now that I have a family and kids and all that. But are you guys near the Legacy West area? Just for anyone who's familiar with the Dallas Fort Worth area.
Yeah, so Legacy West is like the opposite end of Plano, and anyone who's familiar with Dallas Fort Worth, Plano is kind of this weird suburb that like stretches in a really weird shaped way, and it kind of spans the east to west boundaries of what you would consider kind of the Dallas suburbs. So we're actually at the far east end, so east of 75. So that's what's considered downtown Plano. It's very historic, kind of middle 1800s is when this was Plano was settled. So this is actually like old Plano, I guess you would call it. And then Plano extended west to that Legacy West area, which is kind of the far west boundary. And then Plano's kind of everything in between. So it's a pretty, like I said, weird shaped, far stretching suburb. But yeah, it's just this really cool kind of old school, not even like a town square, which would imply that it's shaped like a square. This is like a one single kind of main street type thing where for one city block, there's on both sides just these historic mid to late 1800s buildings, kind of like, one row where every single building is attached to its neighbor, but each address is its own owner because it's technically kind of its own building. So we share a wall on both sides with other businesses that have other owners and are unrelated other than sharing a wall. And yeah, just recently we had like a St. Patrick's Day event, which kind of took over that whole city block, and everyone opened up their doors, and there's cool like wine walks where everyone just kind of like all the businesses open up and do kind of shared things. So it's like I said, it's a really cool situation just to kind of step into and have all these things that are already happening that we're able to just kind of integrate ourselves into and step into. And yeah, it's a lot of fun.
That I love that. Could you describe to us a little bit more about the building, especially for anyone who's just like on audio? I hope everyone checks out the links, obviously, but talk to us about the building itself.
Yeah, so it's kind of this like long, skinny building, 25 or so feet wide, and then several hundred feet back to where it's kind of like this galley type thing. And actually, when the sellers originally purchased it, they thought they were going to make more of like an art gallery out of it. They had kind of designed things, it's brick walled, wood floors, everything, as original as can be this far since it was built in the mid 1800s. But yeah, they originally kind of envisioned this art gallery that people would walk through and hang things on the walls and I guess do rotating exhibits and stuff. But from a financial perspective, an events venue turned out to be something that made a little bit more sense for them as the building owners. But yeah, like I said, anyone who's seen the pictures, it's just long brick walls, all wood floors, and kind of just, a blank canvas. They invested a lot in like different levels of track lighting and different lighting because it was supposed to be an art venue. So that makes it kind of, there's a lot of like unique lighting. It's a certified green building. So they went through and did all the, everything you have to do in terms of high efficiency air systems and lighting and electric and all that. So they've got that going. And then there's actually a back room that we call the raw garden, that they called the raw garden. And it was I guess it was an unpermitted structure that was attached to the building years ago. And when they bought it, the bank or the insurance was like, cool, we like it, but you got to knock that down because it's not permitted. We can't insure that. So they rebuilt this back room from the ground up and put in this really, really cool looking wooden grid wall that ultimately is a functional structure that holds the ceiling up. But it turned into this really cool thing. Anyone that sees the websites will see like hundreds of candles spread throughout this wall that's like a grid. And it's something that just like turned into something that is like a feature of the building, but ultimately it's just holding the ceiling up. So yeah, it's kind of hard to describe. But then once people walk in, they're like, oh, cool, this is it. But that's like they say that in a good way, like because it's great for an event venue. If you walked in and you wanted it to be anything else, it might not work out very well in its current form, but for an event venue, it works out super well.
Having that signature piece, I think, is so cool, especially for venues. Like, you want, especially for photos and things like that, you want to be immediately recognized. Someone's taking a photo in front of that. It's like, oh yeah, that's event 1013. Like, you know right away that photo was taken at that location.
Yeah, and it's also cool. And this is something that, like, from producing my own events, like, it's always cool to kind of have that surprise wow factor, which is how I kind of describe that. So anyone who's coming to tour the venue for the first time, they walk in and they're in kind of that main art gallery style room with the wood floors and the brick walls. And then, again, once you see it, you're like, okay, cool, I see it. But then you walk them, past what we have, the restroom, we have like a little quiet lounge area, through the second set of double doors. And then you get into that. And that's kind of that wow factor of like, oh, okay, cool. Like, I've seen the venue, but oh, this is completely different. This is like kind of that icing on the cake, right? The cherry on top. And when we do tours, I kind of like present it that way. It's like, okay, like, yeah, you've seen this part, but here's, that kind of, again, icing on top that really kind of sets it off over the top.
Yeah. As we get into kind of talking more about operations, marketing, like some of the things that you're doing in this space, I'm curious, especially that you're coming into this building that has existing relationships. You're in existing infrastructure, like you said, with the different businesses that are opening their doors. They're doing the St. Patty's Day events, all the different stuff like that. What relationships did you feel like were important to start developing right away to kind of connect yourself in with that community that had already been established?
Yeah, I mean, well, the two biggest ones were, one, existing clients who had booked future events because they bought an event from one owner and they're going to have to execute it with another. So that was one, was just to make sure we were connected to all of them, introduced to all of them, and had the tools we need to work with them and exceed their expectations. And then the second was the existing staff. So that was the other really strong suit, that when we took over, there was an existing full-time venue manager who does a lot of the, basically is the backbone, right? Kind of sells, coordinates, books out the rest of the staff, everything. So having a strong venue manager already in place and building that relationship with her, as well as a bunch of part-time staff, just probably like any other venue, day of coordinators, day of supervisors, cleaning crew, some of those. So those were the two biggest, was, making sure we checked the box of getting in touch with all the clients, and then everyone who was actually carrying out a lot of the day-to-day stuff. Those were the two biggest ones. Other than that, because I mentioned, like I said, we're in this historic downtown area that's a somewhat close-knit community between all these businesses, jumping into action in terms of making sure we were introduced to those people, and they have monthly meetings. So making sure we were starting to attend those, just to make sure that as they do these coordinated events and these coordinated efforts to, grow kind of that area as a whole, that we're contributing to that and not, leaving any slack that the previous owners, they were pulling. We wanted to make sure we jumped right in. So those were the main things for sure. As a venue, there's no, they didn't have any preferred vendors, anything like that required us to, okay, like, this is the in-house caterer, the 3 in-house caterers, so we need to like immediately start to get to know them. None of that. So from that standpoint, in terms of the actual logistics of the events themselves, that component wasn't actually needed.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Let's talk a little bit about the operations and how you're running it, or how the direction that you're moving forward. When you purchased it, was it more of a blank canvas style venue, or was it kind of one of those all-inclusive things where you're charging per person and there's catering and, kind of a basic package involved? What was it, when you took over, and then how, if at all, have you changed it?
Yeah, one of the benefits to this is it was a blank canvas venue. So the whole sales pitch is, the whether it's a wedding and the brides can come in, or the businesses that are coming in to do whatever they want. They can do business events, they can do parties, weddings, they can do pop-up shops, anything, because it was a blank canvas. And that was really one of the sales pitches when you give the tours and sell it, is like, hey, you can do whatever you want, no hidden fees. But then what we kind of discovered talking to potential customers is, well, there kind of were hidden fees, because they could rent out certain types of chairs, or they could rent out certain upgrades to the sound system, or upgrades to the lighting that were already in place, but you had to pay extra for them. things like that the previous owners had, that we were like, oh, maybe if we're selling this as all inclusive, there's nothing hidden, like we should actually make it that way. So there was like little tweaks like that we have started to go through with the pricing and make sure that maybe this pricing structure that worked 13 years ago, that's kind of more or less stayed the same. Like, what can we do to just like freshen it up or make it more clear, or cater to what people are looking for now that maybe they weren't looking for previously. So those are some of the things. But again, like I said, it's a lot of like just tweaking little things, not having to fix anything that's entirely broken. The other big thing that we've been doing is, anyone who runs a venue that manages linens, whether you own linens or whether you rent them, like, linens are like immediately become the bane of your existence. And you don't know, like, oh, should I rent them and pay what seems like an exorbitant rate, or should I own them and then realize like, hey, it costs almost as much to wash this every time as it costs to buy it new every time. So that's the thing that we're currently figuring out, and working with our venue manager to be like, every time an event comes in and wants a certain color, we go through the process of, okay, is this something we want to buy, own, and wash every time it's used? Or is it something we want to keep renting? Is this a color or a material or a size that would be valuable to us to add to the inventory? Or is it something that we just want it to be one and done and, pay the markup? So those are the things that we're starting to do now, where it's like, where can we find some of those additional revenue points, or profit points, I should say, versus what do we just kind of keep doing as was done before, which was pretty much entirely 100% rental.
I'm curious about packages, how you guys sell a package, maybe some pricing information, stuff like that. Because I understand it's a blank canvas, but there's you can sell it different ways. But before we get into that, I'm curious, how much time are you personally spending on this business versus the podcast business? And maybe even for your wife as well. Like, what's the time split look like for you guys, given the fact that you do have a venue manager, maybe some existing team members?
Yeah, for sure. So, it's evolving right now, because my background is in accounting and logistics, whereas my wife's background is in sales and marketing. Like I said, a lot of this kind of early transitional stuff leans a little bit more towards my areas of strength. So I'd say like right now during this transition and kind of getting us settled in, is probably more of my time dedicated than ideally a year from now will be. But I'm probably doing, I would say, 20 or 30 hours a week on this, in addition to full-time running my other company. Whereas my wife is, probably in that 20-hour range, and eventually, she'll be, familiar with the operations, and she'll be the 40-hour a week, whereas I'll maybe be 10 or 5 or whatever. So, it's just kind of this sliding scale right now, because we're so new to running it, just kind of getting our new systems in place. So yeah, that's how it is. And, again, the full-time large company I'm running as well, large in quotes, larger than the venue company though.
Yeah, no, I can imagine having to jump back and forth between the two. You're like almost switching hats. Like you're the client in one hat and you're the vendor in the other hat. That's pretty cool. So talk to me about the packages and the pricing. Are you do you have kind of one price for all the days? Is it broken up? Is there seasonality at your venue? Walk me through some of that.
Yeah, and this is one of the things that we honestly it took us a while to wrap our heads around, which kind of was the light bulb of like, hey, if we're struggling to figure out like how to calculate pricing, then definitely someone that's coming in unfamiliar with the venue or anything, like they're going to be struggling even more. The current pricing structure when we took it over was different days of the week, different times of days, have different hourly charges. Because it is kind of a blank canvas, it's not coming with food. It's not coming with anything like that. It's just coming with the space that you decide what you want to do with it from a bringing an outside vendor standpoint. There was just a lot of moving pieces and a lot of complications. So a Sunday morning would be different than a Thursday evening, would be different than a holiday, would be different from a Saturday all day rental versus a Saturday morning rental. So there was just all these things. And so that was our first thing, is like, how can we simplify it? And in addition to those those venue space rentals, there's this list of add-ons, like I was mentioning, the linens and the different seat types. So for us, it was just like really hard. People would ask us like, well, what does it cost to rent it on Saturday? And it's like, well, glad you asked. Let's get out the calculator and the spreadsheet and let's do this together. And that's not what people running an event want. They want an answer, right? Like they just want to be able to quickly figure out in budget, yes or no, right? Like that's ultimately what we decided is and then we can dive into refining that cost structure, but they just need some kind of round estimate. And we weren't even able to do that just because there were so many variables. So that's something we've been working on, is kind of what you described, like the package deal. And what we're kind of working towards right now is kind of the typical three-tiered package is like, okay, we can do that first package as it's currently structured, which is just straight hourly, blank canvas, blank space. You do everything else yourself or through outside vendors, all the way through like, hey, here's your per person cost for us to do all the tables, all the linens, all the chairs, have your supervisor or venue supervisors there running it all for you. And being able to kind of clearly have a pricing sheet that people can say, okay, cool, I want everything done for me on a Saturday night for 5 hours or whatever. Here's your cost. Which right now we just can't do. So that's something that, like I said, as we started integrating ourselves in the business, discovered to be one of the important things for us to kind of get our hands dirty on.
Do you, with that, I heard you say hourly. Do you find that because of the space that you're in, because of the location and maybe, client behavior, that it really makes sense to do an hourly rental versus doing more of like an all day rental? Like, are you doing a lot of corporate events versus weddings, or is it really a mixed bag?
It is a very mixed bag. I would say probably 50% of the business is wedding or wedding adjacent things, whether it's a ceremony or a reception or both. But the other 50% can be a little bit of everything. So, business events, parties. We've had some like fundraisers, small high school proms, large, club soccer, like banquets where they bring in, all the different teams and age groups. So like, it's so different that putting together like an all day wedding package would just crop off. Like I said, 50% of our other business that they need to calculate it differently. The other kind of interesting thing, and I don't know how many other venues do this, is we'll often do 2 events a day. So we'll do an event that runs, 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. and then, quickly bring in the team and flip the room and clean the building, and then do a 7 to midnight event. And those are ones that are super complicated logistically because you're kind of tearing down one event at the same time as setting up the other event. And, there might be dishwashing involved if there's meals in both, or all kinds of stuff happening. So that's the other thing. Like I said, I'm not as familiar with what other venues are doing, but because of that, plus is we're able to get 2 events in one day. The minus is everything that goes into doing 2 events in one day.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask about that. What's your perspective on when you sell something like that? And maybe this hasn't happened too often, but when you sell, let's say you sell a 9 to 2 event, are you ever concerned that you're going to be kind of closing off that day for an all day rental? Because now you basically only have the availability to book that latter half of the day, and vice versa. Like if you book a latter half of the day, then you're boxing yourself into only doing a smaller category. Is that a concern?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is. And it's kind of that risk versus reward because, at least as far as what we've stepped into in terms of future bookings and what we've seen with past bookings is there's some weekends where there'll be 4 events in 3 days on a weekend. But then there's other weekends where there's nothing. It's just kind of weird. It's not even a seasonal. It's not like a wedding venue that's a barn venue that's only able to open 3 or 4 months a year because of weather and stuff. And so they know every Saturday is going to be booked and every Friday is going to be booked. It's not like that. It seems to kind of be hit or miss. So we have to balance out like, how do we want to hold an entire day back in September, an entire Saturday back in September, because it might have an all day booking versus like, let's just sell the night. Because the night, at least in the hourly rate, is our most valuable, time period, and then take the risk that, that might be the only thing that happens that day and we can't book a morning event on the front end, versus like holding it open and turning down business because of a future all day event. So, that's kind of just a risk reward from the business perspective that we have to take. The other thing that we have to balance that we do see quite often is, well, someone wants a noon to 5 event. Well, then that means like, okay, it's still only kind of a half day in terms of hour commitment, but it's kind of splitting the day. So you can't really turn it over on time to do an event after or before. So, that's another thing that we see come across quite often, because the half days as we draw them up make sense for us from a business perspective. That doesn't always make sense from a client perspective and when they want their events to be. So, kind of all learning experiences. And the simple answer would be, like you said, is just like, hey, here's how much a Saturday costs. You can use it in the morning, at night, all day, but that's the cost, right? And then, but then we'd be cutting out some of the smaller event business. So, I'm sure you see, talking to all the venue owners, there's no right or wrong answer. It's just how you look to, skin the cat, so to speak.
It's so true. It's funny, when I first got in this industry a couple years ago, I was like, we'll, make a template and it'll be successful across the board. All the, every venue can use it. We can share what we're learning, and we'll do this 5 different times. And even though at our 5 different properties that we have currently, there are similarities in structure, kind of there's, the bones are similar. They vary substantially in how the client likes to consume the venue, like how they like to book, the hours that they like to spend, the pricing that they associate as fair with what's being offered. And, sometimes we have to get to a certain price point, we have to add in rentals. Whereas at another property, we don't have to have those rentals added in for free to be able to hit that price point. So there's all sorts of different things with hours and inclusions and things like that. For you guys at Event 1013, what do you include with the base rental when people are using it? Is it just the space, or are they getting other things as well?
It's a space, and we have a pretty decent inventory of tables and kind of our standard in-house chairs. So those come with it. So we've got, the 2 different size rounds. We've got several different size rectangles. And then we've got kind of this standard black chair that we have up to 200, which is kind of our seating capacity in the venue, depending on the configuration. So all of that comes with it. And then we have upgraded garden chairs and bar stools and some spandex chair covers and all the things that can kind of be added on. But it's just kind of that base table and chair. So in theory, you really can pay that kind of sticker hourly price and do your event. It's not going to look as nice without any linens or anything like that. But because we allow outside catering, we allow outside vendors, we allow self-catering even, you could, in theory, pay our base price and host your event. And it also comes with, we have a really great built-in sound system with 3 different zones. So you could play different music in our main gallery, in the restrooms, and in that back room I was describing. Each one of those is independently controlled. So you can play, it's actually a pretty smart sound system. So you can play the same thing throughout them. You can split them up differently. And it's also interesting, the previous owners installed like a super strong kind of DJ sound system mounted from the ceiling, with the thought of DJs can come in and plug into their speakers. And because the floor space is a little bit limited, they don't have to bring in their own speakers, so they can plug into the house sound, still have high quality speakers, but not have to worry about taking up floor space with the the sticks that the speakers would be standing on. They also installed several different like lighting packages, so you can turn on the disco ball, or you can turn on kind of the different lights that, again, a DJ would normally bring in and set up themselves. It's all pre-installed already. So all of that comes with our base rental as well. So you can have an event with music and lights and tables and chairs for our base package, and then it kind of goes up from there.
Would you be comfortable in sharing kind of what that base price is? Maybe it's a range. You don't have to give us exact numbers if you're not comfortable. But like, if I want to go in and bring 150 people and I want to rent it for the day, approximately what am I spending for what you?
Well, again, it goes back to day of the week, time of day, all of that.
Let's get this spreadsheet out.
Anywhere. Yeah, exactly. But I mean, I would say roughly anywhere between like $300 and $800 an hour, depending on if you're in there on a Saturday night or a Monday morning. So that it's somewhat easy to calculate if you're just looking at like, hey, just give us the base package. We kind of have a pretty simple chart that we send people. But really, because we know most people are adding on something, that's where they start, having to calculate things. Yeah. And like I said, it's not really done by head. We kind of have two zones. So anything under 75 people is 1 hourly rate. And then we just have like an additional couple $100 surcharge if it's over that, just because inherently our venue manager is going to have more prep work to do if there's twice as many chairs to set up or twice as many tables and things like that.
Agreed. We're actually just now, the most recent property we built on has a lot more corporate events, quinceañeras, baby showers, community events, things like that we previously at our other properties, it was like 90-10, 90% weddings, 10% other, right, whatever that was. This one is going to be a nice 50-50, and so now we're starting to play more with that. And it's definitely an interesting, it's definitely it's an adjustment as far as like pricing model, property access and all that stuff. This is super, super cool, Dan. I'm wondering, and I was hoping that we were going to have some time to talk about the podcast. I don't think as much maybe today, but we can, possibly have you back on. I'm wondering about your marketing. What are you doing? What platforms maybe are you currently on? Are you doing Google ads? Are you using social media? What's your marketing strategy right now?
Yeah, so because we stepped into the existing business, we also stepped into existing contracts with some of these platforms. So we stepped into existing Wedding Wire and the Knot contracts. So those are ones we're kind of evaluating. That's one of the things that we're really looking to improve is the tracking system to see where are the leads coming from and what leads are actually converting into new business, which that's something that wasn't necessarily in place in a structured way. So we're spending this time where we have to be committed to some of these platforms to seeing how well they're actually performing. So that's something that's TBD. That again, we didn't have a choice, so we're just making the best of those commitments. We're also running some light Google ads or running some light Yelp ads, just kind of experimenting with places of interest. Event Active, if you're familiar with that, has actually been really good for us. That one's bringing in some really good leads that are seeming to convert really well, just kind of anecdotally speaking. Here Comes the Guide is one that we weren't familiar with before we came into the business, but we're kind of really liking how kind of curated and hands-on they are and helping us try to promote the venue on their platform. And then, ultimately we'll end up doing some paid, Facebook and Instagram marketing. But right now we're just kind of not trying to throw everything against the wall. We're trying to take a very kind of structured approach because, like I said, the venue has great history when you search for it. Website's been going for 13 years. So SEO's there. We actually relaunched the website. So that was one of the things that when we took over, I don't know if it was a website that was there 13 years ago, but it kind of felt like it might have been. It was not mobile friendly. It's one of those websites where you go to on your phone and you have to side scroll and move around. And the previous owners actually didn't even have a way to like access the website anymore. Like from the back end, it was something we had to take over. So it was good that I had some background in like some of that kind of thing to be able to replace the website. But yeah, ultimately from a marketing perspective, just getting a new responsive, fresher feeling, more functional website was a big thing as well. So yeah, to answer your question, we're still trying to figure it out and take some kind of a structured approach into figuring it out.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's always tricky, especially in the beginning, figuring out what's working, what's not working. We've had a lot of those questions internally around like marketing platforms. Are they worth the cost? But you see the leads coming in, but are the leads qualified?
Exactly. That's the thing. You gotta, what's the conversion of the leads?
Yeah. And speaking of that, are you using any tools? Like, are you using a CRM system to process either the leads or the actual bookings?
Yeah. So one of the great things, the venue manager that I mentioned that was kind of there already as on a full-time basis was she had just somewhat recently moved everything over to HoneyBook from literal paper and file folders was what it had been done on before she got there. So while I'm not necessarily sold on that platform as a long-term solution, it was better than the alternative of walking into a bunch of filing folders and papers. So it's functional for now. And we're evaluating some of the other options. Some of the guests you've had on previously that have some different systems. We're looking into those. But that's something that We've got the autoresponder, we've got the form that kind of sends out the different messages based on what type of event they're inquiring, sends out the pricing sheets. So that's something that we're, evaluating, but it wasn't something, again, that we had to just jump into and change right away. And it's good enough. And we're experimenting with some text message marketing. So we're using Zapier, if you're familiar with that. So when someone comes in as a lead on the website, not only do they get the email, but then they get the text message that says, hey, we just sent you an email. And then people engage with us via text message right away. So just little things like that kind of we're not changing the actual product of the event center, the event space itself, but we're changing the path to get your event booked there.
Yeah, totally. The user experience. I mean, that's huge. That's I think, going to create an immediate difference. Can you quickly walk us through the Zapier integration side of things? Like, what platform are you using for the actual text message delivery? Because I think that's definitely something that is, I think text is almost the new email list. Like if you've got a texting list or like a texting community, right? Walk us through that a bit.
Yeah, and real quick step back. If anyone's not familiar with Zapier, it is software that connects two unrelated tools to one another so that they can interact with one another. So in this case, whenever someone comes in as the lead on HoneyBook, when we capture their cell phone number, then we're using a tool called OpenPhone, and that's for our entire phone system, kind of our phone tree when people call in, and it also has text management. But when people come in as a new lead on HoneyBook, then Zapier sends that message, sends their information over to OpenPhone, which will then fire off that that text message that I just referenced. And yeah, Zapier is super cool. And like I said, it works for a lot of different platforms to connect them. OpenPhone is not a text marketing software. So it's not meant for mass blasting. There are lots of tools where you can have your kind of phone number list, contact list, just like you would an email list, and you would mass send the message. OpenPhone really is like business phone management, kind of VoIP. Where for us, we have one business number, but there's several of our team members that can answer phone calls coming into it, can place phone calls coming out of it. And also we can all text message to clients from that same number, and the client doesn't know it's coming from 5 different people. So we're able to really make customer service really great because they're getting answered at all times of the day. And they're like, how does Joy answer all these messages at once? And it's like, well, it's a team effort, but Joy is kind of the face of it. But so through going back to Zapier, for those one-off text messages to clients, it's okay. It's just not if we were sending out 1,000 text messages. It's not meant for that.
Totally. A lot of times, though, people are, they've got a wedding email that they've set up, future Mr. and Mrs. Smith 2024 or whatever it is, right, at Gmail. And they're sending all of the inquiries and all of the leads and all of the marketing is going to that email. And so it could be pretty overwhelming. I mean, that email can fill up, that inbox can fill up real quick. And so kind of cutting through some of that noise makes a lot of sense. Are you seeing a pretty good open rate and a pretty good response rate when you do text people?
We do. And we'll because, naturally any of these CRMs that's sending off automatic emails, they'll land in people's spam folders. That's just how email works. So they'll get the text message that said, hey, I just sent you an email. Let me know if you didn't see it. And we'll hear people say, oh, they'll reply, I didn't get it, right? They'll reply to the text message, I didn't get the email. And then we can text back, check your spam. And they're like, oh yeah, it's there. Well, if they didn't have that second point of contact to text us that, it would have lived in their spam forever. And they're just like, hey, event 1013 didn't send me what they said they were going to send me. So that immediately, even if it's just 1 or 2 of those a day, that's 1 or 2 leads that would have been lost forever had that text not fired off. The other thing we'll hear is people will text us and be like, oh, you know what? I got a bunch of emails. Can you just text me the link to your pricing sheet? Cool. Now that we've captured your lead, we have no issue texting it to you. We wanted to get your email and phone number first, but now that we have it, we'll text you whatever you want. We don't care if it's text or email or phone call, as long as you've got that information. So, we're seeing a lot of that. It's good for anyone who manages a venue, knows tour no-shows, having a tour scheduled and them not showing up is a big thing. Our venue manager said she'd often call people the day of to confirm their tours, and it would just go to voicemail and she'd never hear from them, and then they wouldn't show up. But she'll now can send them a text message from the platform and they'll be like, yeah, I'm not going to make it. Well, that prevents someone from having to go to the venue and set up and do all the tour and stuff like that. So not just from a closing leads perspective, but also just an efficiency of running our business perspective, those texts have come in super valuable.
That's huge. That's so cool. Dan, thank you. I appreciate you just taking the time to unpack the process of what it was like to get this whole thing started, to take over this venue. You know, it sounds like you've got so many incredible things already in play, and just I can tell with the business knowledge that you have and kind of the marketing sense and what you and your wife are working on. I mean, you guys are going to be incredibly successful at this. So congrats. Like it's been really neat. Thanks for unpacking it for us.
Yeah, no problem. Like you can probably tell, we're still in the honeymoon phase. So I'm sure at some point the the whatever you want to call it, the monotony might set in. But right now we're just super excited to keep learning new things and putting new things into place and see what happens.
Awesome. Good stuff. Hey, if people are interested in connecting either directly with the venue, they want to maybe book an event or check out the space more, where should they be going?
I mean, you can just go to event1013.com. That's the number 1013, or Dan at event1013.com. If you heard something that I'm doing wrong or something that you want to suggest, or you want me to share anything about Zapier or anything else. I come from the industry side of events, so I love talking shop and love talking systems and processes. One of the reasons I was super excited to be on the show. So happy to share my knowledge and get some back in return.
Awesome. Cool. Dan, thanks so much again. And I'm excited for everyone to hear this. This is going to be a good one.
Thanks, Jonathan.